Ben Fogel, explorer, television presenter, wildlife enthusiast, and United Nations patron for the wilderness. Welcome back to this, the fourth and final episode of the Be the Change in 2022 podcast, a series of conversations organised by One Carbon World in collaboration with the United Nations Climate Neutral Now initiative. COP27 is now bringing parties together to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Egypt's COP27 presidency vision is to move from negotiations and planning to implementation. Aligned with this vision, One Carbon World aimed to promote immediate action and strengthen its joint agenda with the UN in the mitigation of the effects of climate change through swift, voluntary action. The main goal of this podcast is to present to you inspirational stories and innovative solutions, reach more individuals and organizations worldwide, and encourage them and you to commit to do everything in your power and to do it now. This fourth episode is titled Nature Positive Climate Action, Raising the Bar for Net Zero Emissions. Understanding our green assets and climate action opportunities can lead to carbon neutral organizations and supply chains, as well as unifying the commitment towards sustainability, the protection of biodiversity and the environment, and mitigations of the effects of climate change. We really do have some fantastic guests for you today, but before we invite them to join us, we'd like to share a message from Miguel Naranjo, Programme Officer of the United Nations Climate Neutral Now initiative team in Bonn, who will be highlighting the importance of nature-positive climate action.
Hello, my name is Miguel Naranjo, and I am Program Officer with the UNFCCC Secretariat based in Bonn in Germany. I want to thank One Carbon World for organizing this session on nature-positive climate action today, as well as you, participants in the session, and everyone listening for the interest in this. Now, I probably don't need to remind you, but we are living currently the triple planetary crisis, which means climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. So any effective response to ensure that our society becomes sustainable, that is able to continue to exist in a peaceful, collaborative manner into the future, needs to consider those three aspects at least. And the nature positive response is a way to address two of those at least at the same time, the climate and the biodiversity aspects. Our well-being as individuals and as society, but also as businesses into the future is dependent on the effective response to this triple planetary crisis. And that's why responding as fast and as strongly as we can to it is key. It's not something that we have to do only because it's the right thing to do for us and for future generations, for nature, but it's also the right thing to do for business, for the economy. There is a clear business rationale for acting to respond to climate change and to the biodiversity loss that we are currently experiencing. Of course, all of these topics are all interrelated. All of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are interrelated. So when we say nature positive response, it actually has linkages also to energy, to gender, to education. So all of this is interlinked. And what that means is that we have an opportunity to have a much bigger impact than what we could originally imagine. We may be focusing on a response to climate, a response to the biodiversity crisis, but if we respond to them appropriately, the benefits will go far beyond just the specific topics of climate and biodiversity or nature. Now, I don't claim to have all of the responses to this issue. I don't think anyone has all of the responses to any of these issues. And that's why it's so important that we come together to discuss, to exchange, to share practices, to share knowledge so that we can accelerate the response. We're living in a very difficult global situation right now, economically and politically. Things are very challenging all over the world, but we cannot forget that things will only get worse if we do not respond effectively to the triple planetary crisis. For that reason, again, I'm very thankful for those of you participating today, to One Carbon World for organizing, and for everyone who will be listening in for your interest and for your contribution to this conversation, and hopefully to the practical actions to respond to it. This has to become part of our nature. We have to become more sustainable, not as an additional thing that we do as individuals or as organizations, but it has to become part of everything that we do. It has to become second nature to us. So again, thank you for contributing to moving into that direction. I hope you enjoy the session, and I wish you the best.
Thank you very much, Miguel. As always, a very inspiring message. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our very first guest, who'll be speaking about nature-positive climate action and their work with the value chain. We have with us Nusheen Gasmi, Head of Sustainability of Industrial Promotion Services. IPS, as it's known, is the infrastructure and industrial development arm of the Aga Khan Fund for Economic Development, which is an affiliate of the Aga Khan Development Network. IPS was created to provide venture capital, technical assistance and management support to encourage and expand private enterprise, particularly in countries of sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. IPS invests in financially sustainable and ethical projects capable of promoting economic development and reinvests profit in other economic development initiatives under its umbrella. Welcome, Nusheen.
Thank you for having me.
Where are you right now?
I am currently in Nakuru, Kenya.
I am very envious. Let's get on with the very first question. There's a lot of discussions about what we need to do and how best to do it. Many find this quite overwhelming, resulting often, I think you'll agree, in a lack of action. What, Nusheen, was your secret to going ahead to take that very first step?
Yeah, so IPS has long championed environmental sustainability, taking responsibility and really working towards protecting and restoring our natural environment. However, I think that the recent heightened momentum, particularly in terms of addressing our greenhouse gas emissions, has been triggered by the leadership of the Aga Khan Development Network, who formed an environment and climate committee that set ambitious goals and provided actionable guidance. It's really their vision and their commitment towards achieving carbon neutrality by 2030 that is now reflected in the leadership across IPS, as well as its portfolio companies located in East Africa, West Africa, as well as in Central Asia. And it's such intentional and responsible leadership, I think, is a critical ingredient in inspiring and spearheading sustainable change. And in doing so in a manner that uses climate science to inform our decarbonization plans and ensuring that these are really integrated into business strategy and growth.
As we all know, one of the key challenges and opportunities lie within effective engagement supply chains to drive change via local farms, communities. How have you approached this to deliver effective outcomes to your project?
So we have an opportunity to really widen our influence, and we're now engaging with our suppliers as much as possible, especially those that have not yet commenced their net zero journey, to support them to measure, report, and have credible carbon reduction targets across their operations and the rest of their value chains. We recognize, of course, that this is a process and it will take time and effort. However, the IPS agro industries especially are in a really unique position to have significant direct influence with their suppliers. Most of the agro industries have inclusive business models. So we engage large numbers of rural small-scale farmers to supply different crops such as green beans, mangoes, cotton, pyrethrum, among others. And as we know, these farmers are some of the most vulnerable communities, and are already enduring the effects of climate change on a regular basis. So in this regard, these companies therefore provide the farmers with extension services to promote sustainable agricultural practices, whether that's focusing on soil management, water harvesting, improved irrigation, agroforestry, among others. And these tailored initiatives aim to improve crop yields, consequently increasing farmer income, while being aligned to overall business growth. And I believe at the end of the day, to make a difference, it really is our collective responsibility to support farmers by collaborating with like-minded public, private, and civil society partners to identify and scale climate-smart practices that will help these farmers to adapt and become a lot more resilient to the changing climate, as well as promote sustainable natural resource management.
I'm wondering, Nishin, what has been the most rewarding outcome, both on a business and a personal level for you in your work, often out in the field?
Yeah, so from a business perspective, amongst many, a key rewarding action has been the tangible proof that greener, climate-friendly solutions can in fact be viable and are good for business. And also the recognition that really concerted effort and commitment, everything is doable. To truly lead by example, catalyze impact, we can in fact grow our businesses while improving the quality of life of the people we work with, as well as protecting our planet. And from a personal perspective, one of the most rewarding outcomes for me so far has been noticing this growing conversation and engagement internally, seeing this gradual shift in attitudes from having to do something and check a box to willingly choosing to change due to a better understanding of the risks as well as opportunities that this agenda presents. And it's also seeing our leaders and our internal green champions becoming change agents, you know, inspiring others and creating that spark that then creates that ripple effect. For me, that resonates with the idea that it's those small incremental changes that create profound effect. Of course, I'm cognizant that it's the time at which this happens that's also very essential.
Jean Gasme, thank you so much for joining us. Please say hello to the flamingos that I'm sure aren't very far from you. The work you do really is fantastic. You're inspiring so many people and organizations to commit to climate action and sustainability. I also think that this is the way forward. We all have a role to play, but we can't do it if we're isolated. We need to work together in the same direction. Thank you again. Well done for all the work of the IPS. We will now have some more inspirational organizations, and we will return in a minute.
Understanding our green assets and climate action opportunities can lead to carbon-neutral organizations and supply chains. This also serves to unify the commitment toward the protection of biodiversity and the mitigation of the effects of climate change. Caravella Coffee is now leading the way in carbon-neutral value chains, bringing sustainability to the Galapagos Islands and their communities.
This is not the Bahamas, Hawaii, or the Maldives. In fact, it is unlike any other island or tropical paradise with pristine and paradisiac beaches and breathtaking resorts. The Galapagos Islands are just plain and simply unique. It is an environmental treasure, a biodiversity sanctuary, or how people usually call it, a living museum and showcase of evolution.
But most impressively, in such a biodiverse, sensitive archipelago that has been endangered by human activity such as tourism and agriculture, we have witnessed firsthand local farmers' commitment to the environment and our planet. The 26 coffee farmers from the island of Santa Cruz, which have partnered with us during the last 5 years, have implemented on their farms sustainable coffee growing practices, protecting the biodiversity and ecosystems of the island, and respecting the fauna who are the real owners of the land. Further proof of these coffee growers' strong commitment with their island and the planet is the result of a third-party carbon footprint verification of Caravella's coffee supplier farms located on the Santa Cruz Island of the Galapagos archipelago in Ecuador. The verification was conducted in the fourth quarter of 2021 by One Carbon World and resulted in a climate positive or carbon negative footprint of 2 tonnes of CO2 captured per hectare per year, thus achieving the carbon neutral international standard.
This third-party verification process found that in 1 year, the coffee that we source from 26 farms in the Galapagos Islands emits a total of 83 tons of CO2 equivalent, but it does sequestrate a total of 304 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, resulting in a net balance of 221 tons of CO2 equivalent sequestered, or roughly 2 tons of carbon dioxide sequestered per hectare per year. This means that for every kilogram of green coffee produced in these farms, 7.3 kilograms of CO2 equivalent are sequestered. Compare these results with the carbon emission of coffee farms in Colombia, for instance, which emit an average of 8.6 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of green coffee produced.
In the meantime, we will continue to generate awareness and educate coffee growers all over Latin America to implement better farming practices that protect, conserve, and respect the environment, aiming to have a carbon zero supply chain before the end of the decade. This project is just the first of many third-party verifications that we plan to do over the course of the next 4 years to verify the carbon emissions of our entire supply chain, hopefully with the help of our roasting partners around the globe, and continue making coffee greener. Join us in making Galapagos coffee better.
Many organizations are joining the nature positive revolution. With our support, you can verify your green assets and inset your carbon footprint. Start your journey with us today.
Now, moving on to our second guest, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Alejandro Cadena, co-founder and CEO of Caravella Coffee, who'll be speaking about their fantastic work in the Galapagos Islands and their sustainability efforts. Caravella Coffee is a Latin America specialty green coffee exporter and importer that responsibly sources from smallholder coffee producers. For the past 20 years, they've been sourcing and championing great coffee from Latin America's best smallholder farmers, pursuing quality and transparency at every single level. Alejandro, thank you very much for joining us. Where are you today?
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation. I'm currently in London, but I live most of my time in Colombia.
Very fine coffee from there, and other Latin American nations as well. Alejandro, tell us how you have supported the Galapagos Islands and coffee growers in achieving carbon neutrality, and why.
So Caravella supports farmers in their transition towards sustainable agricultural practices all over Latin America, and we are aware of the impact that the growth of agriculture in the region has on the conservation of its ecosystems. In Galapagos in particular, we're looking to provide producers with better prices to increase their prosperity. And we started working there in 2016, first explored how to open new markets for the coffee growers in the archipelago, and developed commercial strategies that highlighted the intricate flavors and specialty quality of the coffee beans. So when we first arrived, we found a community of coffee growers very proud and deeply committed to the conservation of the forest assets, the biodiversity, and the natural resources in the island. And so we found that the local weather conditions of strongly marked seasons gave agriculture an opportunity to thrive from fertile volcanic soils with good drainage, natural honey water filtration mechanisms with decreased methane emissions. And due to the distance to the mainland, it's located about 1,000 kilometers from Quito, from the capital, and the lack of inputs, local producers were using already artisanal practices to grow coffee with restricted or no use of synthetic fertilizers and very low impact on the environment. Therefore, the focus of our coffee grower education team, which we call PECA, has been on working together with farmers on how to optimize and improve their established farm processes to achieve better quality and increases in productivity while keeping care of the local flora and fauna. We focus on the importance of preserving those shade trees that they had, conserving the fertility of the soils for the future due to the addition of organic matter. And in an approach to highlight exemplary coffee production practices that are used in the islands and showcase these growers as a model for the industry where high quality coffee can be produced under processes responsible to the environment, Caravella engaged in developing an environmental impact case study for the coffee farms we work with in Galapagos. So we did this project with 26 farmers that supply us with the coffee, and the results from the applied methodology and subsequent measurement using the Cool Farm Toolkit and One Carnivore World accreditation were reliable indicators of the environmental gains of not using synthetic fertilizers and growing coffee under forest shade.
Having been to the Galapagos Islands, thank you very much for taking care of the local flora and fauna as part of your strategy. What's interesting, Alejandro, is that while most businesses are only measuring their emissions, you've decided to go a step further and measure your green assets as well. Why is that?
Yes. So at Caravella, we think that the sources of emissions of greenhouse gases in agriculture are only accounting for one side of the whole environmental impact. During our times, we have found that the sequestration of carbon dioxide by trees through high-density shade-grown coffee and the subsequent storage in the soil are factors worth studying further to better understand the overall impact of coffee production in the world. So our PECA team advocates for the adoption of farm practices that veil for the preservation and regeneration of soils by reducing the use of synthetic fertilizers, increasing the addition of organic matter, and conserving and restoring the local forest inventory. The qualitative characterization and quantitative measurement and monitoring of green assets at coffee farms becomes the most efficient approach to understanding and assessing carbon sinks in the entire coffee supply chain. With this in mind, in 2021, and as a scale-up initiative, we measured the carbon footprint and green assets in around 700 farms in all of the 7 origins where we source coffee from. We are convinced that by building a robust forest inventory, where positive and negative effects for coffee productivity, quality, and environmental impact of green assets are effectively integrated into the measurable benchmarks and indicators, we will be able to support the advocacy of sustainable agriculture with other coffee farmers in the region, transmit our learnings to other coffee regions in the planet as well. So through education, we can communicate the positive outcomes to the industry and restore traditional views of agriculture and its burden on the planet's resources. But keep in mind that sustainability is integral for our business. Therefore, we want to construct a strong and reliable environmental assessment that we can use to highlight the commitments and efforts, both monetary investments and labor, that coffee producers make at farms to protect the environment, and lever these to strengthen relationships with coffee roasters around the world, which we believe will result in increased prosperity for coffee growing families in Latin America and elsewhere.
The million-dollar question, Alejandro, is how does Caravella approach the challenge of balancing economic growth, which is what businesses need, and environmental protection?
Since our founding, Caravella's business model has advocated for a shared responsibility for shared prosperity for all people involved in the coffee industry, from coffee producers to coffee drinkers. So for our more than 2 decades, our purpose has been to, as we say, to make coffee better. So this includes the prosperity of coffee smallholder farmers in Latin America. That is what we consider families with farm sizes that below 5 hectares. You know, most coffee producers in the world are smallholder farmers, and Latin America is clearly no exception to that. So throughout these times, we have learned that farmer prosperity is a very delicate balance. On one side, there is farmer income, which we want to maximize to provide better opportunities and quality of life for coffee growing families. But on the other side is the long-term sustainability of their business and the planet, which ultimately depends on the environment and the ability to provision for the long-term future. So coffee producers' income is a factor of the price they sell the product, the productivity of their crops, and the size of their farms. For smallholders, who cannot buy more land, that's not easily done. Price is the best way, could be the best way to increase their income. However, price is mostly beyond their control, as they are mostly price takers from the price that is established in the market, the global market. So with that in mind, crop productivity becomes the key factor that they can influence and set to grow their profit margins and therefore their business margins. So we have on one side the balance between income and on the other side sustainability. And so we decided to measure the farmer prosperity using the local living income benchmark. And then on the other side, the environmental impact, measuring the carbon footprint in all the 7 origins where we source coffee from. And when we measured farmers' prosperity, we found some origins where our farmer partners have very sustainable production practices and low to negative carbon footprints, but where productivity is very low. So, as mentioned before, because of these very low yields, they are not able to meet their minimum basic needs, despite us paying them above market prices. So Ecuador, for example, is one of those countries where we are paying them the highest average prices of all the 7 origins where we operate, yet those farmers do not achieve a decent living standard. The reason for that is their productivity is very low, because and they do have very sustainable business practices, which lead to very low productivities in turn. In contrast, we have Colombia, where productivity is 3 to sometimes 7 times higher than that of Ecuador. And why is Colombia's productivity higher? Because they have a high use of synthetic fertilizer and the lowest density of shade trees per hectare from all the 7 origins. This high productivity and higher prices help Colombian farmers achieve the living income benchmark. However, these farm practices, although very productive, also show the highest environmental impact, the highest footprint, and are the least environmentally efficient of all our origins, exposing farmers to be highly vulnerable to environmental shocks and the depletion of natural services from which such crop productivities depend on in the long term, such as soil health, pest protection, and water availability. The beautiful part of this whole study that we've done is that our data shows that achieving a living income standard does not necessarily require a compromise in sustainable agricultural practices. And so we've observed that farm systems producing coffee under shade with high tree densities and low synthetic fertilizer input can be sustainable and provide prosperity to farmers. 2 of those examples are Guatemala and El Salvador, where coffee producers present farm operations where they could earn, if they could earn 10 to 15% higher prices, something relatively easy to achieve with the help of consumers and roasters, they could reach the minimum living income standard while overall sequestering carbon in their farms and having a regenerative impact on the planet's natural resources. So then, as you can see, Latin America is a widely diverse region, not only socially and environmentally, but also diverse in the coffee production approaches and crop systems used in rural areas where coffee is grown. This creates a diverse array of necessities and ESG gaps. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach that can effectively address these different necessities. Therefore, the main challenge that we have and our PECA team has is to design an array of solutions specific for each country, farmer, community, or farmer, and provide producers with technical advice on how to increase the productivity of their crops through sustainable agricultural practices that are also intended to preserve the natural resources that coffee production depends on and decrease farmers' vulnerability to environmental shocks like we've seen in the past. If there's something that we've learned throughout these 2 decades, is that sustainability is a journey that cannot be sailed solo. We are convinced that it is only through the development of a shared vision and a shared responsibility of all actors in the value chain that a balance can be found where we can all be prosperous while protecting our planet.
Wow, Alejandro, thank you. That's deeply inspiring. I look forward to having a cup of Caravella coffee guilt-free, knowing that you are making such good, positive strides. Thank you so much for taking time out and keep up the good work. Now, before we move on to our last guest of today, we have some more inspirational organizations and their work towards climate voluntary action. And we'll be back in a minute.
Global warming is causing severe damage to our planet, creating extreme weather patterns, and putting at risk not only our future, but also our planet's natural resources and its biodiversity. If we want to stop this trend and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need to transition to a net zero world by mid-century. And while we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible, we need to find a solution for our unavoidable emissions. Nature-based solutions are a key tool for this transition. And carbon credit projects help us rebalance unavoidable emissions. They also boost the economy, create additional employment, and help achieve sustainable development goals. To avoid the worst effects of climate change, 50 scientists, researchers, academics, and the farming community have come together to help farmers become climate heroes. We've called this project Agriculture CO2, and we are bringing together the best land practices, the latest Earth observation technology, and the carbon markets to accelerate soil carbon sequestration. Let's hear more from one of the project managers.
38% of the world's land surface is covered by agriculture. By increasing the carbon that we have stored in these agricultural soils, there's quite a lot that we can do to contribute to climate change mitigation. Regenerative farming offers a set of practices that contribute to this end. They aim to restore and revitalize soils and the wider environment in a productive farming context. However, farmers require both incentives and support to adopt these practices in large numbers. Agriculture CO2 is a European-funded project of 3 years that aims to make it easier and more profitable for farmers to adopt regenerative farming. We bring together agronomists, soil scientists, cutting-edge farmers, and technology specialists and public bodies to co-create specific solutions for regenerative farming within 6 pilot sites across both Europe and Africa. We make use of the European Union's Earth observation program, Copernicus, for a source of reliable data, which makes our solutions more accurate and more resource efficient. As we're moving from a project to a product phase, we invite you to join us to help make this impact and to help make farmers climate heroes.
We have already helped olive growers in Crete, flower farms in Kenya, cereal growers in Poland, and farmers in Serbia. And we have successfully rolled out the first national projects in the UK, Europe, and Africa.
We farm regeneratively to grow crops, improve biodiversity, soil health and carbon sequestration, producing delicious, nutritious food for our customers.
For years, we watched soil degrading and farmers' income slowly vanishing as a result of climate change. Agrivar's mission is to change that. We developed an AI-based software that helps farmers transition from conventional to regenerative farming, sustaining yields and giving them access to the voluntary carbon markets in partnership with One Carbon World. Our initiative will reward over 100 farmers in 2023 and will cover more than 200,000 hectares. Together, a step closer to a 1.5 world.
In Uganda, Kijani Forestry plants trees to break the cycle of climate-induced poverty in Africa. 5 million trees have already been planted. Our target is to plant 150 million trees by 2026 and 1 billion trees by 2030. As we adopt science-based targets and emission reduction plans, one thing is clear: we are failing our planet. We need to accelerate our carbon sequestration in order to get back on track for our future. We need to understand our green assets and use them as a force for good. You could be the next climate hero. Learn more at onecarbonworld.com.
We are heading towards the end of this, the 4th and final episode of the podcast, which makes me a little bit sad, but happy at the same time because we have been learning from so many incredible organisations and individuals. Now, our last guest of the day is Faye O'Connor. Faye O'Connor is the UK's ambassador to Uruguay. In 2020, the British Embassy in Montevideo became the first diplomatic mission in the world to achieve carbon neutrality and join the United Nations Climate Neutral Now initiative. Through a strong partnership with One Carbon World, this embassy is now renewing its efforts and commitment to achieving a net zero world by mid-century, aligning with national and regional and global targets. The embassy has been taking further actions to raise awareness, inspire sustainability in the local community, and encourage others to play their part. From the use of electric vehicles and solar panels to recycling and eliminating single-use plastics, their fantastic team is working every day to minimize the impact on the environment as much as is possible. So thank you very much, Ambassador O'Connor, for your time. It's great to have you here.
An absolute pleasure, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Tell me first, what initiatives has the Embassy promoted in line with sustainability?
Well, you'll know, Ben, that the UK is committed to reduce its emissions by 68% by 2030. And our updated NDC that came out on the 23rd of September, I think, set out a much clearer pathway about how we're going to do that and made some updates on our progress. But as part of that, HMG, the UK government, is also aiming to reduce emissions from public sector buildings by 75% by 2037. And all embassies are encouraged to play their part in that. And also to think about how they might support the Paris Agreement. I personally have worked on climate change for a number of years, both bilaterally and multilaterally. And so I really saw an opportunity here when I came here as ambassador to push the envelope. Uruguay also has excellent conditions with somewhere around 95 to 98% every year of its electricity coming from renewables. So you've already mentioned some of the things that we've been up to, but for example, at home in my own estate, that means we fitted solar panels to provide hot water. We've retrofitted double glazing and insulation to try to minimise energy loss. We've created a kitchen garden which produces our own organic vegetables. We compost our organic and food waste. We've ended the use of single plastic. And we are changing our very small fleet of cars. 2 of 3 are now electric. But also, this is about acting with our host country. So that means we've used our COP26 presidency to pull together international actors to make sure we're really putting a coherent offer forward for the Uruguayans. We've been upskilling those designing and delivering Uruguay's transition to electrical mobility and increasing collaboration on protection of biodiversity and the oceans. We held an Environment Week jointly with the Ministry of Environment. That was really about raising public awareness about all the actions that the public could take. We've been supporting Uruguay on its efforts to mainstream climate change considerations across all government activity and to take an inclusive and very robust delegation to COP26 last year, and also to develop their world-leading ideas on climate finance. And we've also been celebrating their success and looking for opportunities on green growth too. It's really important that this is a positive agenda, not a negative one.
Ambassador O'Connor, can we just take a moment to marvel at your achievement, the first embassy in the world to achieve carbon neutral international standards? I mean, really astonishing. And also to join the Climate Neutral Now initiative. What does that mean to you?
I have to say I'm tremendously proud that we are the first embassy of any country, in any country, to achieve this. And obviously our offsets as part of this process support local projects in desperate need of finance that support climate change activity, particularly reforestation. But it's really important that it's not just about offsetting. We're extremely grateful to the Climate Neutral Now team at UNFCCC, as well as One Carbon World, for actually giving us an evidence base to identify the most impactful changes that we can make. So, as already touched upon, in 2019, the biggest source of emissions at the embassy and residence was heating, which was actually responsible for 70% of our emissions. So my first step on arrival in 2020 was to turn these off. Fortunately, Uruguay is not a terribly cold country, and we looked to replace our fuel oil system with air source heat pumps. So that means we've basically cut from 65 tonnes of CO2 equivalent to 24 tonnes of CO2 equivalent over just 3 years. Obviously, that's even whilst we're increasing the scope of measurement. So we've moved from just buildings to now including official travel in country. We've reduced our CO2 footprint by 62% so far, and of course we're planning to keep going. So this really means obviously walking the walk, but the main reason we're walking the walk is to bring others with us too. So we're constantly sharing our experience and our challenges with our host country, with others, including my colleagues in the UK network elsewhere in the world. And I'm absolutely delighted that my colleagues in our embassy in Chile and in our consulate in Miami have also now joined us in becoming climate neutral now.
Mission accomplished or bigger goals?
Oh, much bigger goals. There are still so many more things to do. I mean, two more embassies out of our mission have joined us, but we have an awful lot of embassies and footprint worldwide. So we will be working on that. Yes. So I mean, on next steps, Ben, obviously it's a great privilege for me to be a first mover, but being a leader means a lot more investment and creativity at times. But I really think it's important for us to invest if we can, because we have to help drive those costs down and we have to map out a path for others. Obviously, as we address the obvious quick wins every year, we have this challenge of tackling tougher areas and expanding our scope. Having made the heating almost zero emissions, major sources of emission are now fuel for official travel, electricity and waste going to landfill. As I said, on electricity, on fuel this year, we've already changed to electric vehicles, but on electricity, we plan to upgrade our solar panels so they'll produce electricity as well as water. We also need to make more efficient use of our energy. Our electric car, I'm also using this to push action by others. I've insisted that all my official internal travel in Uruguay be in this car. That basically is encouraging them to install the infrastructure necessary for this car more quickly and in more sort of diverse corners of the country. We've also begun to ask when our e-cars might be able to actually feed energy back into the national grid in the hope that this encourages Uruguay to think seriously about the technology and the opportunities here. We're also working hand in glove, as I've mentioned, with Uruguay to bring their ideas for sustainable finance out onto a global platform. I really think these ideas could be a game changer. They're really interesting in the way they're trying to look to mobilise both more private and public flows across the whole of the sustainability piece. And we're looking to bring more British businesses with a sustainable offer here to Uruguay to help Uruguay's transition towards a decarbonised economy. And as part of that, I'm really keen on this idea that Uruguay are thinking about becoming a green hydrogen producer and exporter and looking at how we might support that. That's not just about more activity for us or in Uruguay, of course, but supporting others. So essentially, we really want to mirror in our local activity the UK's 10-point plan to build back better, support green jobs and accelerate the path to net zero, and to work with the Uruguayans to ensure they're doing it too. As a diplomat, I really know how much words matter, but usually the biggest worth of words is actually in the actions they either commit to take or to avoid. So that's why at a global level, the UK was absolutely delighted and keen to lead the UN negotiations at COP26. But it's also why at a local level, we're determined to take action and really be the change.
Ambassador O'Connor, thank you so much. Congratulations. Hopefully, you are the pioneers for British embassies all around the world. Keep up the good work. Thank you. This really is an example of how every single organisation, private or public, big or small, can make a difference. It's with concrete steps that we can all start the journey together. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you very much for joining us.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
We've now reached the end of our 4th episode of the Be the Change in 2022 podcast. I'd like to thank you for listening and following these conversations. We've just heard some fantastic examples of nature-positive climate action and how these steps can unify our commitment towards sustainability, the protection of biodiversity and the environment, and, of course, the mitigation of the effects of climate change. I wish we had more episodes, but I'm sure we'll be back soon to tell you about other inspirational stories on how to help save the planet. The main goal of this podcast was to present to you these stories and innovative solutions to help reach more individuals and organisations worldwide and encourage them to commit to do everything in their power and to do it now. I think we can say that this exceeded our expectations, as it was great to see so many people coming together to protect our home and boost sustainable development. Thanks to all our guests that took part, and also to the One Carbon World for organising these events. You will be able to relive these conversations on Spotify, but also on YouTube and on the One Carbon World website as well. We hope to see you soon. And remember, you can also be the change in 2022. Have a great day.